Good morning and welcome to our church, Unitarian Universalist Community Church. I'm your worship associate, Jim O'Neill, and it's a joy to be with you today, both personal presence and also those virtually. For our visitors, let me tell you a little bit about Community Church. We are an open-minded, progressive, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of social justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every being. We have several announcements today and a welcome of a special guest. So our board president, Kathy Laramel, will present that.
Good morning. So the church received an email from Cynthia Samuels, who was an active member before Katrina. Her daughter's house burned to the ground, and she is trying to raise some funds for her. So there is a GoFundMe with Cynthia Samuel's name on it, and we hope if you're willing and able, you'll go and try to help them out. And today we do have a special guest, Ed Buckner with the Red Flame Hunters, and he's here today to tell us about what's happening with that group. Thank you, Ed.
Good morning. Every time I come here, it look a little bit different. And the people look different. So I just come to tell you all about what we're doing. Well, our last venture is that right now we're fighting with the city to make sure that we can have the Mother's Day parade to honor the mothers in the community and around the city, the world, that the great works that mothers do. So we're just into that fight with the mayor and stuff like that about making sure that our community can look as good as any community. And the boys and myself, also, we had a great Mardi Gras. We were so happy to have Mardi Gras again. So we really made some good suits. I think the older guys, we actually done our best work to date. And we looked it nice, and the little kids, I think they're more inspired to get their parents to do a little bit more work to look like us now. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So I'm here today to just talk about the program and how we just need to try to continue, and through the church's efforts here, how the church's efforts have helped us out. I was supposed to bring some beaded pieces and stuff like that, but I got home at 3 o'clock this morning. I had a ball. I went to my club, had their ball, and it was a nice time, and I'm just tired. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm just thankful for y'all help all the time. And so there's some money that we have here at the church. And so what I was talking with Ms. Liz about was that we've been trying to get a portable building. We went from a portable buggy container to portable buildings, and we just all over everywhere. So the money has just like slowly just decreased a little bit. So Big Chief Tugger is one of the young men I work with. He's now selling cars after he bought them from the auction, remodeling the cars for us, putting new body and fender work and stuff to it. And Jaquan, another Indian, he's actually doing the mechanic work and stuff. So the kids, they didn't outgrew me. They're doing their own businesses and stuff like that. So we got together, all of the Indians, and we built a little shed on a private lot that some people own. They told us it was okay to put something there. So we got the shed where you can paint and do the body and fender work. But the same building that we put there, we thought about that we can build our own building with the same monies that we have here, is just talk with you guys and get the materials, and then we can start adding the concrete and the stuff that really makes this whole thing look good. We could add all of them things that we need. And, I just thought about if we, it's even better if we could buy it, but if we can really build it, I think the boys will take care of it even greater, because it's something that they put their sweat equity in and they built it. So I'm just here today again, always asking for money, but I'm just asking to use the money that we already have in stock and store here that's banked in here, and being able to move forward with the project of building a building. And it probably still have like a little dirt floor. We probably won't have no real floor, but I think we can build the outer shell and put it in the backyard, build it right in the yard, and I think it'll stand for a long time. It's just getting the supplies. And say this to everyone, my address is 1823 Elysian Fields. At any time you're passing that way, or you just might feel like you want to come and see the suits and stuff like that, you're definitely welcome. It's a lonely, quiet house. It's just me, so don't be surprised if you don't hear anything. But we definitely welcome everyone, anyone, at any time. So thank y'all for letting me come and share where I'm at with you all. Appreciate y'all all the time.
Thank you, Ed. We love the work you do with the youth of our city. Such an important work. There are other announcements, but you can check your weekly email for that. Now, let's suppose you don't get the weekly email. Would you contact our office and give us your email address? We'd be happy to add you to our list. So today, we're delighted to welcome back to our pulpit Reverend Justin McCreary. Now, for many of you, he needs no introduction, and you're, of course, delighted that he's back with us today. But for those of you who haven't met him, Justin officially became a UU in 2010, began serving the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Jackson in 2013. Justin received preliminary fellowship with the Unitarian Universalist Association in 2019 and was ordained by the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jackson in November of 2019. During his tenure at UUCJ, that's the Jackson Church, Justin has had the opportunity to serve not just the church, but the greater Jackson area in regular social action, along with Mississippi Immigrant Rights Advocate, Mississippi Religious Leadership Conference, NACP, and other grassroots organizations. In 2015, Justin had the opportunity to perform one of the first legal gay marriages in the state of Mississippi. In the years to follow, he would participate in many protests and actions with the Poor People's Campaign and Black Lives Matter of Mississippi. So we'll look forward to hearing from Reverend Justin today. As we begin our worship, we typically start that with our chalice lighting, because it's our custom to light the chalice to invoke hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join us in singing, "We Light This Flame." We light this flame to affirm the light of truth, the knowledge and the warmth of love and community, and the fire of hope and commitment. We have another special occasion today. That is the ceremony welcoming new members to our community. Marilyn Malone will lead that for us.
Deborah Salvatore, Marsha Jan, and Rebecca Green. These new members have chosen to make a commitment to this congregation by signing our membership book. New members, we are very glad to have you here with us, and we are happy that you have chosen this community of fellow seekers to travel with you on your life journeys. Will you accept our gifts of fellowship, discovery, and service? Will you offer us your unique presence and gifts? Will you add your name to the long history of Unitarian Universalist people who spread hope with our living faith? Will you engage with us as we seek to create a community and a world dedicated to love and justice? New members, congregation, will you welcome these new members with the warmth and comfort of your fellowship? Will you seek to add your strengths and talents to the new gifts they bring? Will you share our triumphs and our struggles as our community grows and changes? Let us say together the covenant that is printed in at the bottom of your order of service. This covenant is a promise that we make to ourselves and to each other, which holds our community together with common purpose and common love in the midst of our diversity of belief. Love is the doctrine of this church, and service is our prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Now we welcome you to sign our membership book, and when you finish, please remain in front because we'd like you each to tell us a little bit about yourselves if you feel comfortable. And also, if there's anyone in church today who is already a member, but you joined while we were online and we weren't meeting in person, but you haven't had a chance to sign the book, please come up and sign the book now. Okay?
So I'm also an retired, unretired. So anyway, I do things and then I do them again. So that's me.
Welcome, Deborah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Groom. I'm a Louisiana native and live on the North Shore, but I've been coming to this church for a little while and really enjoyed it. Thank you all for being so welcoming. I'm an architect, do mostly commercial projects.
for 45 years, and I joined the UU, Thoreau Unitarian Universalist congregation in Stafford, mid-90s, and then later on I moved into Houston and joined First UU. So I'm just happy to have found this community and to be back in church again.
How delightful is that to have you join us? It's very exciting. So now is our time for all ages by our religious education coordinator, Cynthia Ramirez.
Ouch. Darn mask. But anyways, good morning, everyone. Happy belated Earth Day. But we're going to have our Earth Day service next weekend, so it's Earth Week. Okay. So this morning, I'm going to share with you a story. It's called The Cracked Pot. The author is unknown because you'll see it in many cultures, this story. A water bearer in India had 2 large pots, each hung on the end of a pole, which he carried across his neck. One of the pots was perfectly made and never leaked. The other pot had a crack in it, and by the time the water bearer reached his master's house, it had leaked so much of its water and was only half full. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the bearer delivering only 1.5 pots full of water to his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it was able to accomplish only half of what had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceives to be bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream. "I am ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you." "Why?" said the bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your master's home. Because of my flaws, you have to do all of this work, and you don't get full value from your efforts," the pot said. The water bearer felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, "As we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path." Indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot took notice of the warm sun warming the beautiful wildflowers on the side of the path, and this cheered it up some. But at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it had leaked out half of its load. And so again, the pot apologized to the bearer for its failure. The bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on the side of the path, on your side of the path, and every day while we walked back from the stream, you watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's table. Without you being just the way you are, we would not have this beauty to grace his house." Each of us has our own unique flaws. We're all cracked pots. Nothing goes to waste. Don't be afraid of your flaws. Acknowledge them, and you too can be the cause of beauty. Know that in weaknesses, we find our strength. The end, you bunch of crackpots.
We got hymn 272, O Prophet of Souls.
Community Church Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. Members and friends generously help us do the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can give online at ccunola.org/stewardship or by text at 504-370-2659, text GIVE. Of course, you can also send a check to CCUU at 6690 Fleur de Lis Drive, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70124. Thank you so much for supporting our community church. Now is our sacred time of joys and sorrows. If you are online, you can write your joys and sorrows in the comments or chat box to be read aloud after our musical interlude. If you wish and you're here, you may come forward to express those joys or sorrows, or you may also write your comments on a card that can be passed around and brought up here. So after the musical interlude, we will share those joys and sorrows. This is a joy from John Davenport. Kathleen and I went to the French Quarter Festival Thursday, and it was great. First time in many years. From Jane Powell, my sorrow is that my father passed away. Condolences to you, Jane. Is there anyone else who needs to come forward? Scott, please.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good to see you. Can you hear me?
People online can't hear you. People
Right here.
What you were going to hand me one? Okay. I feel like I'm giving a speech. So I've always understood that expressing joy was bragging for a long time, and I've changed my mind on that recently. I've had some things that have taught me and some people that have taught me that expressing joy is expressing thankfulness. I'm going to try to make this brief, but I'd like to give you a little bit of the backstory. In 2010, I was newly single. I had a little boy with a woman that I was not married to, and I was living like there was no tomorrow, spending money like a drunken sailor, treating myself to everything I could think to treat myself with, money-wise. New cars, antique pickup truck, motorcycle, art pieces, you name it. Well, I wasn't minding my little LLC, which I founded 8 years before, and of course the economy caught up with me, and I wound up losing the beautiful dream home I had in Old Gentilly, and everything else along with it, with the exception of a few things. So I wound up being homeless for about 3 years. Fortunately, I was not on the streets. I had a couple of friends that let me stay in these dilapidated places that they were preparing to renovate, and then eventually I moved back in with my parents in a little apartment above their house. But my joy and my thankfulness is that this past Thursday, I purchased a really nice, comfortable new home near the beach in Waveland for the first time since I lost that house 11 years ago. So I wanted to express thankfulness for that. And there may be some parties coming soon, so.
Additional joy is for those of us who find this community so enriching. What a joy it is to welcome new members who found their way here. Finally, there remains some sorrows probably that are deep within us that we haven't found the words to express them yet. So we light a candle for those. Likewise, there are some joys that are bubbling up from within that we haven't found words for yet, but we want to honor those by lighting a candle.
It's good to see everyone today. And as you were sharing, I thought to myself, 13 years ago, I was homeless in Jackson, Mississippi. And I always appreciate knowing that I'm not the only one who that ever happened to. I think it's important that we share those times in our life because we never know who's sitting next to us and who needs to hear it. This reading is weird. So when I started thinking of the sermon that I have for you today, all I had in my head at the beginning was Emily Dickinson's poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers, and Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. And I thought about those two birds, and I thought there's a really neat tension between those things, so I slammed them together. Some of you might appreciate it. Some of you with highfalutin English degrees might be aggravated by it. And some of you might just think it's long and unnecessary, but it is something that it's this tension that I think is really important in life. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from the book's surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped the stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul, that sings the tune without words and never stops at all. But the raven, sitting lonely on a placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing Farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the birds said, nevermore. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without the words. It never stops at all. Then I sat, engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat, divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining, and the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from some unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch! I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from my memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there a balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within this distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of thy lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit thy bust above my door, take the beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. I suspect in 10 or 15 years, maybe 20, if I'm still preaching, I will step up behind some pulpit somewhere and tell a story. It'll start something like this. Well, that was when I was living back in Jackson, Mississippi. It might have been 2020 or maybe 2019. Anyway, I'd been told my whole life that to that point that we were overdue for a pandemic. That on average they hit every 100 years or so, and I assumed, though, like a lot of people around me, that we'd grown more than that technologically and in medicine. And over the last 100 years since the Spanish flu, I never figured a pandemic would hit in my lifetime. Then I'll talk about beginning to hear stories of cities all over the world shutting down, and then it hit New York. I will say something like, I was in Target with my wife, Alicia, trying to find hand sanitizer one day as I was watching an old man buy every bottle of soap on the shelf. There was no hand sanitizer. Then I overheard someone say that the first case had been identified in Mississippi. All of a sudden, something that had been theoretical became real. I will regale them after that with about the weeks that followed in the great hunt for supplies. And it might sound something like this. In the weeks that followed, the shelves at stores emptied. I drove from place to place to find toilet paper, while there were pictures online of people with rooms full of it. People hoarding toilet paper. And then the whiskey distilleries started producing hand sanitizer. And that's when the fear hit. I'll tell people hospitals began to overflow so that they would have to set up emergency rooms in tents in the lots, and hospitals couldn't find things they needed like masks and respirators and beds. And at this point in the sermon, I would hold up a mask my mother made for me, and I'm not doing that now because this isn't the sermon I'm preaching. I would tell the people who didn't go through it how seamstresses and tailors all over the country were making washable masks from any extra fabric they may have had. I'd mention that engineers were building respirators to donate to hospitals from household goods because there weren't enough. I would regale them on how we all stayed home, baked bread. I would tell them about Zooming. And if you know me well enough, you know that I will use that entire story to talk about a descent into depression. You can laugh, that's fine. And the world that struggled to get out of bed while I remained locked in my home. I might talk about it as a darkness, or being stuck in a pit, isolated and alone, or I might mention that it was crushing like a vice, and I will probably mention that over and over again, that I would find times where I couldn't breathe because of panic attacks, that I was unable to sleep at night and regularly overwhelmed with fear. But most of all, I will talk about the feeling that it would never get better. I would talk about this overwhelming feeling that this was going to be my life from now on. I might echo the words of Edgar Allan Poe from The Raven. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. Desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there a balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quote the Raven, nevermore. But most of all, I would make sure to mention that it did end. That we all came together again, face to face, faith renewed. If you've never heard the story of the Raven, Edgar Allan Poe's poem, it's a story about grief and lost love. It's a story about believing things would never get better. It begins with him looking back. Distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December. And each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Then there's a knock, and the narrator goes to the door to find only the wind and cold loneliness. Then as he's drowsing, there is a knock on his window, and he opens the window, and a raven flies into his home. He says, "Open here." I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. See the raven perched above his window on a bust of Pallas Athena, who is a deity in representation of love. With nothing left to do in his loneliness, the narrator begins to talk to the bird. And I would probably do the same thing should a bird step into my home and just sit watching me on a statue. He says, "Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling. By the grave and stern decorum of the countenance at war, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven. Ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." I was a kid in middle school when I heard this poem the first time, and I wondered what the shores looked like on the planet of Pluto. And I understand that Pluto is no longer a planet, but it was way back then, and I'm the one telling the story. It wasn't until the years that followed I figured out he probably wasn't talking about the no longer planet Pluto, but the god of the underworld, Pluto. See, I didn't think of the Roman names of the gods back in the day, but then Hades wouldn't have sounded right. Throughout the poem, he talks about his lost love, Lenore. So there is a raven standing on a bust of Pallas Athena. And he refers to the night's Plutonian shore, about the death of love. And it reminds us that this is a poem about grief and lost love. The conversation with the raven does not go well. No matter what happens, the bird will simply respond nevermore to any question, which begins to aggravate and annoy the man sitting alone in his home. Then we get some of my favorite lines ever uttered in poetry. "Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee. By these angels he hath sent thee. Respite, respite, and nepenthe from my memories of Lenore. Quaff, O quaff, this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." And nepenthe is a fictional drug for people who've lost something big so that they can forget this one part of their life. He is begging, please remove these dark thoughts. Please help me forget my lost love, because that would be better than this. But the raven says, "Nevermore." The narrator begins to plead. "Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee, here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there a balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." See, giving up on being able to forget her, he asks, will I ever feel better? And he does this by referencing the hymn that speaks in the positive, there is a balm in Gilead. Asking if there is a balm in Gilead, to which his heart speaks through the raven, nevermore. In a tone even more pleading, he says, "Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil by the heaven that bends above us by the God we both adore. Tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a saint and maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the narrator is asking a simple question using the phrase distant Aden to talk about when he dies and maybe he goes to heaven. Will he see his lost love again? Quoth the raven, nevermore. Angrily, the narrator fights back. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of thy lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit my bust above the door. Take thy beak from out thy form, or take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Having been unable to reason with the raven, to reason with his grief, and having been unable to appeal to the raven's sensibilities, the narrator uses anger to bully the raven from his home. But the final verse tells us that the raven still sits there forever, as a reminder of the grief and loss, never leaving, casting a shadow forevermore on the narrator. Over the last 2 years, the lost loved ones, the lost time, a world in fear, we need some renewal. Searching as a people who needs to reconnect. When we are in grief and when we're in crisis, when we're struggling, it is easy to feel as though this feeling will last forever. And that feeling doesn't often go away until our soul begins to heal from the breaking. Which is why today, the person I am now, who has been through grief, depression, sorrow, and homelessness, I balance the raven with a different bird, a bird Emily Dickinson called Hope. And she says, hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. So I've been reading a lot of poetry to you today, but this is a quicker and easier one to break down. It often speaks for itself. Hope perches in the soul, singing to us and never stopping. There is no storm that could destroy hope, and it asks nothing of us. See, there are two birds, and they form this wonderful tension. The raven will always be there. But given enough time, the raven becomes hope that perches not on my memories of loss, but on the door frames of my heart, bringing me comfort. These two poems remind me nothing lasts forever, neither joy nor sorrow. Everything is transitional. Everything is renewed if we just let it be. If we just push through the hard parts, the isolation, the sadness, if we just remember that joy comes in the morning, it doesn't necessarily make it better, but it makes it bearable. And when the world is falling apart around us, whether it just be our life, whether it be the actual world falling apart around us, sometimes all we can do is make it bearable. All we can do is remember that the raven that sits above our lost love will one day beam to us as hope, calling us evermore to joy, to renewal, to reconnecting. Because if we never experience loss, we can never truly understand love. And if we don't understand love, then what's the point? Thank you for listening. I can't help but tell you how wonderful your pianist. A month ago, I stood and I said, you know what would be cool? The sermon I'm writing for next month, if you could play Mad World. Thank you. Because it feels like a mad world out there. We were here Thursday with family, and I was trying to coach someone through driving through the French Quarter for the first time in their life. And if you've all probably done that at a terrible time, which is any time, and it feels like a mad world. But that's when we come together, when we hold on to each other, when we renew each other's spirit through our smiles and our hugs, our laughter, our jokes, and our tears. Thank you.
As we end our service today and extinguish the candle, we carry that fire of love within ourselves.